Chapter 2, Nation of Brutes. Johnny's Restaurant was a bar and steak joint fronting Florida Avenue, also known as California Highway 74, which cuts through the heart of downtown Hemet. To enter Johnny's, you parked at the rear of the building and came in through the back door. There were no street windows, so it took a moment for your eyes to adjust to the dim interior. Wasn't much to see though. Once you squeezed past the narrow bar, the room widened into a dining area of worn carpet and ripped cushions. Sitting down was an adventure. You never knew when a spring might poke you in the ass. But despite the seedy appearance and musty smell, Johnny's was popular with the locals. Cheap beer and thick steaks had a lot to do with that. A few weeks before he vanished forever, an old friend of mine was at the restaurant to celebrate. I'd known David back at Hemet High right up until my junior year when I dropped out of high school. Through the years, we kept in touch, catching up on old news whenever we bumped into each other around town. He was a family man with 2 young kids and a pregnant wife, and that night at Johnny's, the couple had gathered with friends and family for a baby shower. It would be the last time many of them would see David alive. After gifts were opened, the father-to-be headed for the empty pool table and grabbed a cue stick. And that's where he was, mucking around and minding his own business when 4 outlaw bikers entered through the restaurant's back door. They wore sleeveless denim vests called cuts with the devil-like image of Loki, the Norse god of mischief, sewn on the back. Beneath Loki was a bottom rocker that read California, while above in bold letters was the name Vagos. These full-patched outlaws were flying the colors of the Vagos Motorcycle Club, a gang known throughout California as Green Nation. In the early 1960s, around the time I was still crapping my diapers, a group of biker misfits calling themselves the Psychos spread from Southern California to Mescal Canyon into the city of Riverside and beyond. With balls fit for a wheelbarrow, they even took root in San Bernardino, right in the Hells Angels' own backyard, sparking a turf feud that continues to this day. As membership multiplied, the Psychos adopted a new name, Los Vagos, Spanish for the Vagabonds, or the Tramps, and took green as their signature color. By the time Green Nation spread in the Hemet, chapters had been established in Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and Mexico, and the Vagos had become the largest and one of the most violent California biker gangs. A grab bag of weekend rebels, gearheads, ex-cons, and violent sociopaths engaged in a whole laundry list of criminal activities, from gun and drug trafficking to assault and murder. Leading his posse into Johnny's Restaurant that night was Big Roy Compton, a 34-year-old tattoo artist with a muscular frame covered in ink. From the Vagos MC on the back of his shaved and goateed head down to his steel-toed riding boots. The president, or P, of the Hemet chapter was a convicted felon who once made his living transporting illegals, picking up Mexicans as they crossed the border and running them as far as Arizona. He and his old lady used some of those profits to bankroll a tattoo parlor in Hemet called the Lady Luck, which they opened right next door to the Baskin Robbins. Big Roy first hooked up with the Vagos in the nearby city of Corona, where the chapter was led by Mumbles, a wild man who could fling a knife into a knothole at 50 paces. But Roy had bigger ambitions. He wanted a Vagos franchise of his own. According to club bylaws, that required at least 5 warm bodies and the blessing of the Vagos international president, a pot-bellied gnome named Terry the Tramp, who for 16 years had lorded over Green Nation from his home in Southern California's high desert. With Tramp's benediction and using the Lady Luck as his base of operations, Big Roy got busy recruiting. First to come aboard as chapter vice president was Todd Brown, a man Roy had befriended during a stint in rehab. Big Todd was a juicer who slammed so many steroids in his 36 years that he looked like Captain fucking America, all jacked up and cruising Hemet aboard a $30,000 Harley Davidson, every nut and bolt of it stolen. I never liked Big Roy and his amped up bad boy act, but I really detested his dirtbag sidekick Todd. Besides, being one of the sneakiest sucker punchers I've ever met, Big Todd was a backstabber who took pride in fucking a brother's old lady, then bragging about it. Hell, that son of a bitch would slip his dick in a rattlesnake if you held his head. The other 2 Vagos in Big Roy's entourage that night were Todd's older brother Doug and a tough little Mexican from Northern California named Iron Mike. Big Doug was a loose cannon, usually spun out of his bald-headed gourd on crank. Even his closest buddies walked on eggshells whenever Doug was tweaking. You never knew what that scary fuck might do. Just as tough as Doug, but not nowhere near as crazy. Iron Mike had earned his cred with Chicano street gangs. That little hombre was a true outlaw, always down for the club. If Green Nation needed a volunteer to pop a bullet in someone's head, Mike would be the first one in line asking which year. From the moment Terry the Tramp granted Big Roy his club charter, the Hemet Vagos were often pissing on their hometown like dogs making turf. The way Roy had figured it, the city was Green Nation property now, and any objections would be overruled by brute force. Through fear and intimidation, the Hemet chapter demanded respect for that low-key patch on their backs, making life miserable for everyone in town. Young or old, male or female, didn't matter. When the Vagos appeared, the locals would lower their eyes and turn their heads, afraid to make eye contact. Just a few weeks before the baby shower, some of the Hemet boys were getting hammered at the bar when a mentally disabled young man with a hunchback accidentally bumped Big Todd on the way to the bathroom. Without waiting for an apology, the Vagos spun and shoved the kid hard into the wall. "Don't fucking touch me, freak," Todd exploded at him. Before the young man understood what was happening, Big Todd followed one of his pattern cheap shots, a roundhouse right that caught that dude flush in the head and dropped him like a sack of potatoes. And since Todd had his victim defenseless on the floor, he figured, why not stomp him for good measure? So that's what he did over and over again. It was ugly, man. Big Todd Brown was raging on steroids and completely out of his mind. When the father saw what was happening, he rushed from the dining area to save his son. But the man didn't get far. Invoking the sacred outlaw motto, you fuck with one, you fuck with all, the remaining Vagos intercepted that poor bastard and gave him a savage beatdown. Their dirty work done, the gang scattered like cockroaches from the light, leaving father and son broken on the floor, covered in blood and boot prints. One more time, Sandman. Their dirty work done, the gang scattered like cockroaches from the light, leaving father and son broken on the floor, covered in blood and boot prints. And why? Because Big Todd felt disrespected? See, here's the thing about respect. In my experience, those who demand it are usually the ones who deserve it least, like Hemet's jackbooted thugs. For motorcycle outlaws, giving and getting precious respect is probably the closest thing there is to a chiseled in-stone commandment. Hell, it's almost a religious principle. In fact, every card-carrying member of the Vagos MC wears a patch on his cut that proclaims, "We give what we get." In other words, give us respect and respect is returned. If not, you'll pay the price. But the Vagos, who were out to claim Hemet as their own, had no fucking clue what respect meant. They figured it was something to be extracted with the heel of a boot and the twist of an arm. Hell, even a dumb bastard like me was smart enough to know that terrorizing civilians, anyone not part of the outlaw world, was a really bad idea. That kind of bullying does nothing to earn respect. What it earns are lifelong enemies, including one particular who would come back to bite those bullies in the ass. Of course, not every 1%er was a scumbag. I met decent men who rode Harley Davidsons and flew outlaw colors while recognizing the moral and social boundaries that should never be crossed. The 4 Vagos who walked into Johnny's restaurant that night were not those kind of men. Those were the rotted apples, spoiling the whole fucking bunch. Low-life gangbangers in every sense of the word. Big Roy and company were bullies who got their kicks intimidating others, backed by the collective might of Green Nation. As usual, the Hemet boys were looking for trouble the night they showed up in the middle of my buddy's baby shower. As far as Roy was concerned, a sign should have been hung over the bar announcing, "This establishment property of the Vagos." Of course, that ownership included the table where David was shooting pool, so Roy marched up to him and demanded it for the club. Fact is, my friend had no idea who this arrogant prick was. David had never had a close encounter with the outlaw world before. He just knew he wasn't giving up the cue stick just because some bald-headed asshole with the patch on his back was commanding it. So he respectfully declined. Well, that was not the response the Hemet P was accustomed to hearing. So Big Roy gave Dave a shove. Then Dave shoved back harder. I'd noticed the row of Harleys parked on their kickstands behind Johnny's and knew who they belonged to. I've got full sleeve tattoos on both arms, many of them inked at Big Roy's Lady Luck. I'd worked on tree service crews with Big Todd, and since I rode Harleys and used to fight bare knuckle on the underground fight circuit, both those Vagos figured I'd make a kick-ass soldier for Green Nation and tried recruiting me into the club. Freedom, that's what it's all about, Todd had explained to me, pitching the outlaw life. You've got all these guys behind you, George. We can do whatever the fuck we want. We're gonna sell dope and people will pay up because of who we are. You gotta come join us, man. Fuck that shit. I could see prison sentences coming for every one of those punks. My buddy Freight Train, who lived as an outlaw with the Hells Angels and understood the culture's downside, had experienced firsthand the brutality of turf warfare and the constant harassment from law enforcement. The road taken by the 1% was a bitch to travel, he'd warned me. Better to steer clear. Old Freight Train had been preaching to the choir. At that point in life, I was 42 years old and had experienced my share of time behind bars. And that was never time well spent. No goddamn way was I getting busted again. I needed that Vago patch, like a fat kid needs another heaping helping of mashed potatoes. As I stepped through the back door and entered Johnny's restaurant, I fully expected to meet Big Roy and his jolly green men. What I never expected to see was my friend Dave knocking the Hemet chapter president flat on his ass. And man, it was beautiful. It also sealed my buddy's fate. Before Big Roy could climb off the deck, his 3 bodyguards sprang into action. While Dave's wife and guests watched in horror, the Vagos punched, kicked, and stomped the shit out of my friend with bare knuckles and steel-toed boots. Although, before I could get in between them, the bartender was calling for cops and an ambulance. A week after paramedics hauled Dave's busted carcass from Johnny's, the man was out of the hospital, but not out of danger. A few days later, the father of 2, with a third on the way, disappeared. I don't figure he'll turn up anytime soon either, not without a solid lead, a good shovel, and a whole lot of luck.